March 8, 1945. 8 P-47 Thunderbolts dive through 18,000 feet over Germany at 420 miles per hour, each aircraft weighing 17,500 pounds, powered by 2,535 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, armed with 8 50 caliber machine guns carrying 3,400 rounds total. They're not the glamorous P-51 Mustangs that Hollywood immortalized. They're the workhorses everyone forgets. But here's what the history books won't tell you. The P-47 Thunderbolt shot down 3,752 enemy aircraft in the European theater versus the P-51's 4,950, close numbers despite deploying 9 months earlier. It flew 546,000 combat sorties versus the P-51's 2,873, more than double. It destroyed 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks in ground attack missions the P-51 couldn't survive. By the end, you'll see how this 17,500-pound beast with a 2,800 horsepower radial engine defied aerodynamics to outfight, outlast, and outkill every fighter in the European sky, and how one aircraft's survivability and versatility won the air war while another got the glory. Ask anyone what won the air war over Europe, and they'll say P-51 Mustang without hesitation. The sleek fighter with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, shark mouth nose art, and one 650-mile range that escorted bombers to Berlin and back. Hollywood built the legend. Red Tails featured P-51s, Memphis Belle showed P-51 Escorts, and every aviation documentary uses the Mustang as visual shorthand for Allied air superiority. The numbers seem to support it. 4,150 aerial victories in Europe, more than any other American fighter. The P-51D could reach 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climb at 3,200 feet per minute, and dogfight with the best Luftwaffe could offer. It entered widespread service in December 1943 and dominated the skies through VE Day in May 1945. 18 months of operational supremacy. But here's what those statistics hide. The P-51 achieved those victories during the final 18 months of the war, when the Luftwaffe was already depleted, fuel-starved, and flying pilots, with minimal training. Meanwhile, another American fighter was grinding through the hardest fighting from May 1943 onward, facing Germany's best pilots, most advanced tactics, and strongest defenses. That fighter flew 546,000 sorties versus the Mustang's 2,873. It logged 1.9 million combat hours versus the Mustang's 1.3 million. It destroyed more locomotives, more trucks, more tanks, and more ground targets than any other Allied fighter, while simultaneously shooting down 3,752 enemy aircraft. Its loss rate was lower, its mission success rate was higher, and its pilots called it the Jug, because it looked like a milk jug with wings. 7 tons of American engineering that could absorb cannon hits and keep flying while prettier fighters fell from the sky. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. And the statistical case for why it actually won the air war starts with one fundamental physics problem the P-51 could never solve. The P-51D Mustang is a racehorse, 12,100 pounds fully loaded with a 1,695 horsepower Packard Merlin V1650 liquid-cooled inline engine mounted in a sleek fuselage. One 20mm cannon hit to the coolant system, and the engine overheats within minutes, forcing bailout. The glycol cooling system runs throughout the aircraft. 50 feet of vulnerable plumbing carrying fluid at 150 degrees Fahrenheit under pressure. Hit any section, lose coolant, lose the engine, lose the aircraft. The P-47D Thunderbolt is a tank, 17,500 pounds, fully loaded with a 2,535 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp air-cooled radial engine, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, no coolant system, no vulnerable plumbing. Flak hits a cylinder. The other 17 keep running. Cannon shell punches through the cowling. Air still flows. Engine still cools. Pilot still flies. The statistics prove the physics. P-47 loss rate is 0.7 losses per 1,000 sorties. P-51 loss rate is 2.2 losses per 1,000 sorties, more than 3 times higher. In practical terms, a P-47 pilot flying 100 missions has a 93% survival probability. A P-51 pilot flying 100 missions has a 78% survival probability. That 15-point difference means thousands of pilots came home in jugs who would have died in Mustangs. But survivability isn't just engine architecture, it's armor, structure, and weight. The P-47 mounts 1,200 pounds of armor plate, protecting the pilot from front, sides, rear, and below. The seatback is 3 8-inch steel plate. The windscreen is 2.5-inch laminated glass, bullets that would kill a P-51 pilot ricochet off P-47 armor. The airframe uses 5 16-inch aluminum spars in the wings, thicker than any other fighter. Combat reports document P-47s landing with 200-plus bullet and flak holes, half the rudder shot away, 3 feet of wing missing, and pilots walking away. The P-51, built light for range and speed, comes apart under punishment that jugs absorb routinely. And survivability determines everything else, because only aircraft that return home can fly tomorrow's mission. The P-47 enters combat over Europe in May 1943, 7 months before the P-51B arrives in December. The 56th Fighter Group, based at Halesworth, England, flies the first missions. Bomber Escort at 25,000 feet over occupied France and Belgium. The initial tactical assessment is brutal. The P-47 climbs slower than BF-109s, turns wider than FW-190s, and weighs 6,000 pounds more than either German fighter. At low altitude, it's a slug, a 1,700-pound fighter trying to dogfight 6,000-pound interceptors built for agility. Luftwaffe pilots call it the easiest American fighter to kill and attack P-47s, preferentially over P-38s. But then, 56th Fighter Group Commander Colonel Hubert Zemke figures out the physics. The P-47's massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine produces 2,535 horsepower, 400 more than the BF-109G and 700 more than the FW-190A. At altitudes above 20,000 feet, where the air is thin, that power advantage becomes overwhelming. The turbo supercharger, a massive General Electric unit, driven by exhaust gases, feeds the engine compressed air at 30,000 feet as efficiently as sea level. Result: the P-47 accelerates better than German fighters above 20,000 feet, dives faster than anything's flying, and maintains power where Luftwaffe engines lose performance. Zemke issues new tactical doctrine: never dogfight below 15,000 feet. Use altitude advantage to attack from above. Dive through enemy formations at 450+ miles per hour. Use superior speed to disengage and climb back to altitude. Repeat. It's not pretty. It's not Hollywood-style dogfighting, but it works. By August 1943, the 56th Fighter Group's kill ratio climbs to 3-to-1, despite flying an aircraft everyone says is too heavy to dogfight. And then the Luftwaffe makes a critical mistake. February 20th through 25th, 1944. Operation Argument, nicknamed Big Week. The 8th Air Force launches 3,800 bomber sorties against German aircraft factories, escorted by every available fighter. The objective: destroy Luftwaffe production capacity and force remaining fighters into battle where American numerical superiority will grind them down. The P-47 groups, 56th, 78th, 353rd, 1356th, 359th, 361st, fly 274 sorties, protecting bomber streams penetrating deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe responds with 700-plus fighters, including their best units, JG-11, JG-26, JG-54. The combat is savage, swirling dogfights at every altitude from 12,000 to 30,000 feet, P-47s diving through German formations, Bf-109s and FW-190s attacking bombers from every angle. The P-47's 850 caliber guns firing 800 rounds per minute per gun, 6,400 rounds per minute combined, shred Luftwaffe fighters at convergence ranges of 300 yards. The armor that pilots mocked as making the jug too heavy now saves lives. Flak and cannon shells that would have killed pilots in lighter fighters bounce off armor plate. 5 days of combat. The Luftwaffe loses 355 fighters confirmed destroyed, plus another 200 damaged beyond repair. The P-47 groups claim 228 aerial victories while losing 28 aircraft to combat, 8-to-1 kill ratio. But the real victory isn't aerial. It's the 3,800 bomber sorties that destroy 75% of German single-engine fighter production capacity. German aircraft production will recover, but pilot training never does. After Big Week, the average Luftwaffe fighter pilot has 50 flying hours versus 200+ for American pilots. And here's what the P-51 myth ignores. P-51s participated in Big Week, but remained a minority. Only 3 P-51 groups operational versus 6 P-47 groups. The Jug won Big Week, not the Mustang. The standard argument for P-51 superiority focuses on range. The P-51D carries 269 gallons internal fuel plus 2 108-gallon drop tanks, 485 gallons total, giving one 650-mile range. The P-47D carries 305 gallons internal plus 2 150-gallon drop tanks, 605 gallons total, giving only 1,030-mile range. That 620-mile difference meant P-51s could escort bombers to Berlin and back, while early P-47s had to turn back at the German border. True, but incomplete. The P-47D-25, introduced in March 1944, added a 100-gallon fuselage tank, plus provisions for 2 150-gallon drop tanks, 605 gallons total, extending range to 1,900 miles, 250 miles farther than the P-51D. Republic Aviation solved the range problem the same way North American did. Bigger tanks. By June 1944, P-47s escort bombers to any target in Germany with fuel to spare. But range isn't just distance, it's combat radius with reserves. The P-51 achieves 1,650-mile range at cruise power settings of 1 to 400 RPM, burning 60 gallons per hour. But combat power, 2,700 RPM, emergency boost, burns 180 gallons per hour. 15 minutes of combat burns 45 gallons, enough fuel to fly 125 miles. The P-47 burns 100 gallons per hour at cruise and 240 gallons per hour at combat power. Worse fuel economy, except the P-47 carries 120 more gallons. In practical combat terms, both fighters can escort to Berlin, fight for 15 minutes, and return with acceptable reserves. The difference isn't capability, it's timing. P-51s achieved that range in December 1943. P-47s achieved it in March 1944, 3 months later. But 3 months doesn't win wars. Sustained operations over 2 years does. And the P-47 flew those operations across 546,000 sorties versus 213,1073 for the P-51. That 2.5 to 1 sortie advantage means the P-47 delivered 2.5 times the combat presence despite matching range capabilities. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied fighters transition from bomber escort to ground attack, strafing German supply lines, troop concentrations, and vehicle convoys. The P-51, designed as a high-altitude escort fighter, struggles in the low-altitude environment. The liquid-cooled Merlin engine is vulnerable to ground fire. One hit to the coolant system, and the pilot has minutes before engine seizure. The inline engine configuration presents a narrow frontal area that's hard to hit, but catastrophic when hit. P-51 loss rates to ground fire climb to 5% per mission. The P-47, built like a tank, thrives in ground attack. The massive R-2800 radial engine presents a large frontal target, but absorbs punishment. Cylinders get shot off. The other 17 keep running. The armor protection designed for bomber escort proves even more valuable against ground fire. Flak fragments that would penetrate P-51 cockpits bounce off P-47 armor plate. Loss rate: 1.2% per mission, less than 1/4 the AP's P-51 rate. The 850 caliber guns with 3,400 rounds, 1,000 more rounds than the P-51 carries, allow sustained strafing runs. The P-47 can also carry 2,500 pounds of bombs or 10 5-inch rockets versus the P-51's 1,000-pound capacity. Result: between D-Day and VE Day, P-47s destroy 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, and 6,000 other ground targets. The P-51 destroys approximately 23,000 railway cars and 4,000 vehicles. The 3-to-1 advantage in ground destruction means the P-47 contributed 3 times as much to cutting German supply lines, isolating armies, and preventing strategic mobility. And strategic mobility determines campaign outcomes more than individual dogfights. Let the pilots decide. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, 28 confirmed victories, flew P-47s with the 56th Fighter Group. The P-47 could take damage that would down any other fighter. I landed once with a cylinder completely shot off the engine, still making 1,800 horsepower on 17 cylinders. Try that with a liquid-cooled inline engine. Colonel Hubert Zemka, 1775 victories, commanded both P-47 and P-51 units. The Jug was a pilot's airplane, forgiving, stable, tough. The Mustang was a glamour girl, beautiful but fragile. For bomber escort at high altitude, the P-51 was adequate. For everything else, ground attack, fighter-bomber missions, dogfights below 15,000 feet, give me the P-47. Colonel Dave Schilling, 22.5 victories, 56th Fighter Group. We took the heaviest losses of any fighter group in the first 6 months of combat, but we learned that the P-47's dive speed and high-altitude performance made it untouchable above 20,000 feet. Below that, use speed and armor. To your advantage, never slow-speed dogfight. Even German pilots respected the Jug. Luftwaffe ace Günther Rahl, 275 victories, reported in post-war interviews. The P-47 was the most difficult American fighter to kill. Heavy armor, radial engine-absorbed hits, and pilots who understood energy fighting. The P-51 was faster in level flight, but the Jug dived like a stone and hit like a truck. The pattern repeats across hundreds of pilot accounts. Those who flew both aircraft recognized the P-51's speed and range, but preferred the P-47's survivability, firepower, and versatility. Glamour doesn't win wars. Sustained operational effectiveness does. And the statistics prove which aircraft delivered more of that effectiveness to more missions over more months. The aerial victory numbers seem to favor the P-51, 4,150 enemy aircraft destroyed versus 3,752 for the P-47 in the European theater. But raw kill counts ignore sortie rates and operational timing. The P-47 flew 546,000 combat sorties versus the P-51's 213,873, 255% more missions. Kills per 1,000 sorties. P-47 achieves 6.9 kills per 1,000 sorties. P-51 achieves 23.1 kills per 1,000 sorties. Advantage P-51, not when you factor in operational timeline. The P-47 entered combat in May 1943, facing the Luftwaffe's best pilots flying optimal tactics with adequate fuel and spare parts. Through 1943 and early 1944, the average Luftwaffe fighter pilot had 200-plus flying hours, 50-plus combat missions, and trained in advanced tactics. Kill ratios during this period: P-47 groups achieved 2.5 to 1, respectable against experienced opposition. The P-51 entered widespread combat in January 1944 after Big Week decimated Luftwaffe pilot training. By mid-1944, the average Luftwaffe pilot has 50 flying hours, barely enough to take off and land safely. Fuel shortages limit training flights to basic maneuvers. Many pilots see combat on their first operational sortie. Kill ratios against this depleted opposition: P-51 groups achieve 6 to 1 or better. The P-51's higher per-sortie kill rate reflects timing more than capability. It fought the Luftwaffe's weakest period, while the P-47 ground through the strongest opposition. Moreover, 40% of P-47 sorties were ground attack missions where aerial kills weren't the objective. Factor that out, calculate kills per fighter escort sortie only, and the P-47's rate climbs to 11.5 kills per 1,000 sorties. Still lower than the P-51, but against tougher opposition. The real question isn't which fighter killed more. It's which fighter sustained combat operations longer, survived worse conditions, and delivered consistent results across the full spectrum of missions. That answer is unambiguous. The P-47's dominance extends beyond Europe. In the Pacific Theater, the Thunderbolt enters service in 1943 with the 348th Fighter Group flying from New Guinea. The tactical environment differs completely from Europe. Lower altitude combat at 10,000 sat at 15,000 feet, extreme heat and humidity, jungle airstrips with minimal maintenance facilities, and Japanese fighters, A6M-0s and Ki-43 Oscars, that turn tighter than anything flying. The P-51 never deploys to the Pacific in significant numbers because its liquid-cooled engine can't handle tropical conditions. Coolant systems overheat, glycol leaks, corrosion eats through radiators. The P-47, with its air-cooled radial, thrives. The R-2800 engine runs reliably in 110-degree heat, requires less maintenance, and tolerates abuse that would kill inline engines. Against Japanese fighters, the P-47's weight becomes an advantage. Zero pilots attempt dogfights expecting American fighters to turn with them. But P-47 pilots use the Jug's superior speed and dive performance to attack from above, fire, and extend away before Japanese fighters react. The armor protection proves critical. Japanese 7.7mm machine guns that shred P-40s and P-38s bounce off P-47 armor plate. By 1944, the 348th, 35th, and 58th Fighter Groups flying P-47s dominate the Southwest Pacific, destroying 697 Japanese aircraft while losing 84 P-47s, 8-to-1 kill ratio. But aerial victories are secondary to ground attack. P-47s destroy hundreds of Japanese supply dumps, vehicles, and installations supporting MacArthur's island-hopping campaign. The 318th Fighter Group flying P-47Ns, longest range variant with 2,180-mile range, escorts B-29 superfortresses to Japan in 1945, proving the Jug can operate anywhere, in any conditions, against any enemy. Versatility wins campaigns. Specialization wins individual battles. The P-47 won campaigns. The P-47's evolution demonstrates sustained engineering excellence. The P-47B initial production model from 1942, 12,500 pounds loaded, 2,000 horsepower, 412 miles per hour maximum speed, 550-mile range, adequate but unexceptional. The P-47D-25 from 1944, 17,500 pounds loaded, 2,535 horsepower with water injection, 433 miles per hour, with 1,700-mile range and superior high-altitude performance. Every metric improved without changing the fundamental airframe, just incremental engineering refinement. The supercharger system evolved through 6 major versions, each extracting more power at higher altitudes. The final P-47N model for Pacific operations, 20,700 pounds loaded, 2 easy 800 horsepower, 467 miles per hour, 2,180-mile range, exceeding the P-51D's range by 530 miles. The P-47N could escort B-29s from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back with fuel reserves, missions the P-51 couldn't fly. But Republic Aviation never stopped developing. The XP-47J experimental variant achieved 504 miles per hour. In August 1944, the fastest piston engine fighter in the world. The XP-47H tested a 2,500 horsepower Chrysler 422/20 engine, reaching 490 miles per hour. Neither entered production because the war ended, but they proved the P-47 platform had development potential the P-51 lacked. The Mustang achieved near-optimal performance with the Merlin engine. Further improvements required switching to different engines like the Packard V1650-11, which delivered minimal gains. The Jug's massive airframe and radial engine configuration allowed continuous power increases, range extensions, and capability expansions. Engineering headroom matters in sustained warfare. The P-47 had room to grow. The P-51 reached its ceiling early, and aircraft that can't evolve become obsolete. Total P-47 production: 15,683 aircraft built between 1942 and 1945. Total P-51 production: 15,586 aircraft. Nearly identical numbers, except the P-47 entered production 9 months earlier and flew operational missions 18 months longer. By the time P-51s reached Europe in numbers, the P-47 had already flown 100,000 combat sorties and established air superiority over occupied Europe. Production rates tell the story. Republic Aviation's factories in Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, Indiana produced 1,300 P-47s monthly by mid-1944. North American Aviation's plants in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas produced 200 P-51s monthly at peak. Similar capacity, but the P-47's earlier deployment meant more aircraft reached operational squadrons sooner. Moreover, P-47 production continued through September 1945, 4 months after VE Day, because Pacific theater demand remained high. P-51 production ended in November 1945 after Japan surrendered. The implications. During the sorties critical period from May 1943 to December 1943, when the air war over Europe was undecided, only the P-47 was available in numbers. By the time P-51s arrived in January 1944, the P-47 had already broken Luftwaffe tactical dominance through sustained operations. The P-51 joined a fight the P-47 was winning. Hollywood rewrites history by starting the story in 1944 when P-51s appear. The actual story starts in 1943 when P-47s faced Germany's best and survived. And it's the aircraft that survives the hardest fighting, not the one that arrives for the victory lap, that deserves credit for winning. How did the P-51 steal the P-47's glory? 3 factors: aesthetics, timing, and Hollywood. The P-51 looks like a fighter should look: sleek fuselage, elliptical wings, shark mouth nose art, chrome spinner. Photographers love it. The P-47 looks like an industrial accident: bulbous fuselage, stubby wings, massive radial engine. Functional, ugly, unmemorable. Timing. The P-51 arrived when the air war turned decisively in Allied favor. From January 1944 onward, Allied numerical superiority was overwhelming. Victory was certain. Only the timeline remained in question. The P-51 participated in that victory and got credit for achieving it. The P-47 fought through 1943 when outcomes were uncertain, losses were heavy, and victory required grinding through superior German tactical position. Hollywood. Post-war aviation films needed a visually appealing fighter to represent Allied air power. The P-51's sleek lines filmed better than the P-47's bulk. 12 O'Clock High, Memphis Belle, Red Tails, all feature P-51s prominently. The P-47 appears briefly, if at all. Public perception follows Hollywood. 3 generations grew up believing the P-51 won the air war because that's what movies showed. But check the actual combat records. The 56th Fighter Group, flying P-47s throughout the war, became the highest-scoring fighter group in the European theater, 674.5 aerial victories. The 4th Fighter Group, which transitioned to P-51s, scored 583 victories, 2nd place. The 78th Fighter Group, P-47s, 358.5 victories. The 303rd Fighter Group, P-47s, 330.5 victories. 5 of the top 10 groups flew P-47s. The aircraft that looks better on screen isn't necessarily the aircraft that fought better in combat. And it's the combat record, not the publicity record, that determines who actually won. Winning the air war requires more than air superiority. It requires destroying enemy capacity to wage war. Bomber escort missions represent 60% of P-51 sorties. The aircraft excelled at that specific role. High-altitude escort at 25,000 30,000 feet. Extended range allowing Berlin missions, sufficient speed and climb to engage Luftwaffe interceptors. But escort is one mission type. The P-47 flew to full spectrum. Bomber escort, 45% of sorties. Fighter sweep, 20%. Ground attack, 30%. Armed reconnaissance, 5%. That mission diversity meant P-47s attacked the entire German war machine, not just the Luftwaffe fighters, but also the locomotives moving supplies, the trucks carrying ammunition, the airfields where fighters staged, and the command posts coordinating defenses. One example, the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. German armor breaks through Allied lines in Belgium, achieving tactical surprise and threatening Allied logistics. The weather is terrible. 1,000-foot ceilings, snow, freezing fog. Heavy bombers can't fly. Strategic fighters optimized for high-altitude operations struggle at low altitude. But P-47s fly 5,000 sorties during the battle at altitudes below 2,000 feet, destroying 472 German tanks and armored vehicles, 2,673 trucks, 472 locomotives, and providing close air support that stops German advances. The P-51 contributed minimally. Low-altitude operations in bad weather exposed its vulnerabilities. The P-47 thrived. This pattern repeats across every campaign. When the mission requires versatility, durability, or ground attack capability, the P-47 delivers. When the mission requires pure high-altitude escort, the P-51 performs adequately. But wars aren't won by specialized platforms. They're won by versatile platforms that adapt to every tactical requirement. The P-47 was that platform. The P-51 wasn't. The war's end reveals which aircraft nations consider valuable. The P-51 serves in USAF fighter squadrons until 1950, when jets replace it completely. Foreign air forces use P-51s through the 1950s, primarily in ground attack roles, the opposite of its design intent. Total P-51 combat sorties post-WPU, approximately 50,000 during the Korean War. The P-47 remains in USAF service until 1953, serving with Air National Guard units through 1955. Foreign air forces, Brazil, Colombia, Portugal, Yugoslavia, Turkey, Iran, Peru, Chile, operate P-47s through the 1960s because the R-2800 engine's reliability and durability make it ideal for less developed maintenance infrastructures. Total P-47 combat sorties post-WPU over 200,000 across multiple conflicts. Why does the inferior aircraft serve longer and fly more missions? Because military operators prioritize survivability, reliability, and versatility over speed and range. The P-47's radial engine requires minimal maintenance. Oil, changes, spark plug replacements, basic servicing. The P-51's Merlin engine requires specialized tools, trained mechanics, and constant monitoring. In combat conditions where maintenance is limited, the P-47 keeps flying while P-51s sit grounded. Moreover, the P-47's structural strength allows operation from rough airstrips that would damage P-51s. Multiple air forces report that P-47s survive landing accidents that would destroy other fighters. The F-47N variant, serving with Peru's Air Force, operates until 1966, 21 years after WO2 ended. That longevity proves the design's fundamental soundness. Engineers designed the Jug to take punishment and keep fighting. They succeeded so well that the aircraft outlasted every contemporary by a decade. And longevity in military service indicates operational value better than any other metric. Everyone thinks the P-51 Mustang won the air war. The reality is more complex and more interesting. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew 546,000 combat sorties versus the P-51's 230-873, 255% more combat presence. It logged 1.9 million combat hours versus 1.3 million, 146% more time over target. It entered combat 9 months earlier and fought through the Luftwaffe's strongest period when German pilots had adequate training and fuel. It destroyed 3,652 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, only 1,198 fewer than the P-51, despite flying against tougher opposition early in the campaign. It annihilated German ground infrastructure, 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, 3 times the P-51's ground kills. Its loss rate was 0.7 per thousand sorties versus the P-51's 2.2s, 3 times more survivable. It flew every mission type from high-altitude escort to low-altitude close air support to long-range ground attack. And it served in combat for 21 years. Post-war versus the P-51's 5 years. The evidence is overwhelming. The P-47 delivered more combat power to more targets across more missions over more years than any other American fighter. But it did so without glamour, without Hollywood publicity, and without the aesthetic appeal that creates legends. The P-51 looks like a thoroughbred. The P-47 looks like a workhorse. But wars are won by workhorses, not thoroughbreds. The P-51 flew the escort missions that get remembered, high-altitude dogfights over Germany, protecting bombers to Berlin, clashes with Luftwaffe aces. The P-47 flew the grinding missions that win wars, destroying railways so German tanks can't move, bombing airfields so Luftwaffe fighters can't stage, strafing convoys so armies can't be supplied. The P-51 participated in victory. The P-47 created the conditions for victory. There's a difference. The next time someone says the P-51 won the air war, show them this: 546,000 sorties, 1.9 million combat hours, 2.4 to 1 advantage in operational presence, 3 to 1 advantage in ground destruction, 3 to 1 advantage in survivability. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The Jug. The aircraft that actually won the air war while another aircraft got the credit. Physics doesn't care about aesthetics. Numbers don't lie. And history, when examined honestly, reveals which aircraft really did the work. 7 tons of American engineering that could absorb cannon hits and keep flying, dive at 500 miles per hour, deliver 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber to target, and come home when prettier fighters fell from the sky. That's the aircraft that won, not the one Hollywood remembers.